Man, the paladins are fighting the clerics. There are like actual bears being suplexed through tables. And dude, all tiefling barband Goldica, covering all the Dwarven ska Orica songs. Just mock them. They are on fire. Just, what are you doing here, man? Why aren't you at the Grinning Loin Tavern?
Strixhaven entrance exams are tomorrow, and I've got to study to come up with the perfect fireball.
Why don't you just make one?
That's not how it works. I'm not a sorcerer.
Eh? I can make you one if it'll help. All about the control. Oh god. Oh, jeez. Just
stop touching
just take your book. Oh god. Sorry, just
get out of here.
Sorry, your shirt's on fire. Sorry, that usually doesn't happen. Sorry, I burned down your dorm room. Sorry.
This is fine. Everything's fine. I'm fine with the events that are transpiring here right now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 2 of Unqualified Experts!
Woo!
I'm your host, Braden Gardner.
And I am your recently banned from the Arcane College dorms, corrupt overlord Shane Dayton.
I'll never get into the Strixhaven Academy now.
You will not.
Thanks. So today we're going to be talking about two of our favorite classes from D&D 5th edition, and they're very popular classes for very different reasons.
Yep.
We'll be talking about the pros and cons of playing a sorcerer versus the pros and cons of playing a wizard.
Yep, and for this, I will handle most of the sorcerer. It's something I have DM'd quite a bit for and dabbled in a bit. Braden is hands down the wizard expert of the group, so we will defer to him whenever we talk about the studious casting class.
Well, sounds good. Since you were gracious enough to burn down my dorm room, I will need to have you go ahead and start with the sorcerer so that I can cobble some notes together.
That is a fair trade-off. So, one of the major benefits for sorcerer is if you're relatively new to D&D or relatively new to magic, it can be very overwhelming quickly. And as a general rule, sorcerers are simpler for beginners. They do have various skills and mechanics. You will have to learn about sorcery points, so they're not easy per se. This is not a barbarian type class. Much love to our barbarian friends. But as far as magic casting, you don't have to worry about a spell book. You have this innate magical power. If you just want to learn to use magic, sorcerer is a very good starting class for that. You have a list of spells. If you know them, you can cast them anytime as long as you have a spell slot left. And it really is, in my eyes, kind of the easiest class to learn how to be that caster before you have to get complicated. Especially on some of the early levels, as you're kind of getting the hang of it in a new campaign or new situation. And so for that reason, that's one of the things I like about sorcerers, is I think Braden would probably agree. You have to do a little bit of planning for the wizard from the start. Sorcerers, you just do what you do until you get fireball, and then you throw a lot of fireballs.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The sorcerer's planning basically begins and ends at level up. You don't have a lot of spells to work with, and a lot of your flexibility is going to come from sorcery points, which you can conveniently trade back and forth between your spell slots pretty easily to ensure that you're able to do whatever meta magic you need to do on the fly.
Or if you want to be lazy, you just trade back for more spells because you don't feel like learning how to use them. Might get the rest of the party angry at you, but it's funny in the right circumstances, so I approve.
Fair enough. The wizard, like Shane mentioned before, is all about planning.
Yeah.
Like, he may have said that you do a little planning. If you're playing a good wizard, regardless of your D&D edition, you're going to be doing a lot of planning. You're going to be asking a lot of questions. You want to get the layouts of the dungeons that you're going to beforehand. You want to know what sorts of enemies you're going to be dealing with. Do you need to have extra fire spells prepared to burn away various plants or enemies vulnerable to fire? Are you going to be going up against enemies that are very resistant to fire, and you might need to prepare something like Ice Storm or Lightning Bolt instead? Are you going to be going to places that are known for a lot of traps, where you might need to prep some grease to unstick a lock or pass wall to get through a wall?
Or as our campaign has shown, if you have a fighter and monk who cannot pass a dexterity test if their life depended on it, Callahan, do you have the spells to make sure they don't fall to their deaths at the bottom of an endless pit?
All really important points. Like, you don't have the luxury of just prepping the same spell list every day if you're playing a capable wizard. You're going to be constantly evaluating what you have prepared, how useful was it in the past, how useful is it going to be in the future, that sort of thing.
And that kind of brings up one of the pros of wizards is you can learn way more spells than the sorcerer. You have your magic book, you find a scroll, you come across an edgeling, you get a reward from the DM. You can't use them all at once. You have to prepare your spell book. That's where the knowledge of the class comes in. But you have a very, very wide arsenal. For Sorcerer, if you're allowed 3 level 1 spells, you know 3 level 1 spells. That is your entire repertoire of magic casting. And that's your limit. For Wizards, you may know 15 spells, and then you have to choose the beginning of each day which 3 or 4 are the ones that you're going to arm yourselves for the day. So it's a very different approach to how you do your planning and your magic.
The flip side is, while the wizard has access to all of that extra magic, there is also an inherent vulnerability to that, and that's specifically tied to the fact that you need a spell book. If something happens to your book for whatever reason,
5-finger discount, said the rogue.
You're not preparing any more spells. You're getting by on what you've got until you can either get it back or, worst case scenario, start building a new spell book. The sorcerer, you're naturally talented. Yep. You have someone or something that gave you innate power. It's there.
You're just that good until you roll a 1 on the wild magic table, possibly.
Yeah, don't do that.
And so that's a good part of that. 2, I will say, one of the things I love about the Sorcerer is kind of that charismatic role-playing. Since your stat is Charisma instead of Intelligence, it gives you a lot of freedom if you are heavy into the role-playing. You can be that arrogant guy who just takes his spells for granted. You can be just that easygoing guy who always wanted to be a bard but couldn't carry a tune. But hey, you have magic, so maybe you just kind of fake it. It gives you a few options, whereas since with wizards, I feel like since it's intelligent, since you had to go to the arcane schools, you can still do a lot of different characters. You have a lot of freedom. But it's hard to believe in a wizard who is not the studious type, who is not going to the library, because that is literally the backbone of how you pick up your magic. And so for those of us who like a little bit more freedom in role-playing, that could be a benefit of playing the Sorcerer.
That said, you can still roleplay a wizard in various capacities as well that aren't necessarily tied to librarian or bookworm. You could be a tactician. You could be an advisor. You could be in another capacity very similar where you are in charge of basically laying out a plan or a strategy rather than researching and finding the answer to a specific question. You've got a few different options to work with. Charisma does open a lot more doors as far as role-playing flexibility, but you don't have to be that nerd in the library or someone like me who's stuck in his dorm room or the remains of it trying to get into the Strixhaven Academy.
And it is worth noting that while charisma is often a really loved stat in D&D for good reasons, because in a role-playing game, obviously the ability to get bonuses to interactions is huge, don't overlook the skills that fall under the intelligence. And I think that's one of the benefits of Wizard that does get overlooked. Some of your most important actual skill checks fall straight under intelligence, which for most other classes is your dump stat. So you still have the ability to create very, very different types of wizards, even like a Sherlock Holmes type wizard, because you have the investigation and the other type of abilities where you're rolling for intelligence checks that no one else in your party can make.
And if you're able to pair it with wisdom to have some actual street smarts alongside, that could work really, really well.
Yep. And once again, you do have to do a little bit more planning, but you do have those options. So benefit 3 for sorcerers, and it's interesting because I don't think this is necessarily a benefit or a detriment to either class, depending on how you play them, but I think it is where they're the most starkly different in a lot of ways. The subclasses. So with wizards, my understanding, and Braden will be sure to correct me in a moment, is with wizards, once you choose your school, you kind of want to know how many levels you're going to get in the campaign. You want to know which spells you're going to get to. You want to know if it's a level 13 or a level 20, because those advanced builds on the wizards are absolutely terrifying if you have the full ability to plan out that arc. And that is how you play the wizard. If you are the master of magic and you've spent your life studying it, you should be able to break the DM's campaign by level 18. That is what you're supposed to do. And they're super cool. And that level of specialty creates some really awesome characters. For those of us who aren't quite as good at the planning, because we get too easily distracted, I think Sorcerer does have some awesome subclasses. We all love the Wild Magic Sorcerer. I don't know a DM who doesn't abuse the Wild Magic table like crazy, and pretty much every player I've ever met who wanted to be a sorcerer wanted the DM to abuse that table to spice up the game.
Not wrong.
It's entertaining, it's fun. We don't even pay attention to the 5% chance or whatever. Those rolls come out all the time.
Accurate.
Dragonborn, it can be boring, but if the DM does a good job of rolling in your character's history or making that a subplot, that could be a fascinating role to take. Divine Soul, sorcerers who have access to cleric spells. That is a min-maxer's dream, and they don't even have to multi-class.
Mystic the Urge was a classic for years for a reason.
Shadow, to me, so interesting from the playthrough, where you read that in, I believe it's Tasha's, where you're from this really, really weird place. You get some really weird, dark things with your magic. It has some side effects that you weren't expecting. The role-playing potential on that is huge. Storm Sorcery, meh. It sounds cool. If you have a good DM who has an English major, he can probably paint some beautiful pictures, but it is kind of just meh. I think we can agree on that. Aberrant Mind. That is super exciting if you have a good DM. Now, if you have a bad one, it's boring, and it can go that way. Oh, instead of having a dragon as your source of magic, you just have whatever, and that's it. But to have your magic come from an aboleth, a mind flayer, from the astral plane, from something from the far realms that somehow cut through time and space to imbue you with magic for reasons you don't know, the potential for role-playing and just crazy main plots is huge if you have a DM who, like either one of us, would be licking our chops at someone choosing that subclass. We have an adventure for you if that's the route you're going, and we are not going to waste it. And an odd one, and this won't even surprise Braden because it goes against my instincts, Clockwork Origin is super fascinating to me. I know stunning. No one thinks of me and thinks, oh, lawful and orderly. Understandably. But from such a weird background where the Modrons come from, to make a super lawful character where even your magic has to follow a certain schedule you may or may not know, that is really interesting. With a good storyteller, I could see how that just creates a really unique world, even to a D&D group who's been doing this for 10, 20 years.
I say, it kind of reminds me of the Batman villain who was obsessed with time.
Yeah. I can picture him in his 90s glory right now.
I mean, the trade-off with all of these different options for Sorcerer is, if you scrutinize them, they do follow a very similar formulaic path.
Yeah.
You have a patron or an event that gave you your magic. and that dictates the types of abilities that you get as you progress through leveling. Wizards, you are picking a school of magic, and while that may have the same sort of effect where you're an invoker, so you like to blow things up, or you're a necromancer, so you like to raise an army of zombies to do your bidding.
Who doesn't on a Saturday night?
I feel like the variety, even within that formula, is a little stronger as far as different options, because you're not ultimately dependent on someone else. You're kind of forging your own path in each of those directions. And I also feel that you get to experience the pinnacle of what each of those encompasses faster, because all of the arcane traditions that you get for the wizard cap out at level 14, so before you even get access to your 8th and 9th level magic. Whereas all of your sorceress origins, they cap out at level 18.
Yeah.
So you have less of a chance to do the really cool stuff your class does, because lots of DMs don't like dealing with 8th and 9th level spells, because that's around the point in the campaign where casters get to dictate the rules instead of the GM.
Yeah, and that's fair. A lot of campaigns end at level 12, 13, so it does make a difference. And in fairness, we have a really unusual group in that we have a lot of very experienced DMs, and we have a lot of people who are published fiction writers who have MFAs. So relying on a DM for storytelling aspects in our group is actually a very safe thing to do. I mean, safe, not if you're the player, but you know there's something entertaining is going to happen. And not every group is going to have that, or have the time in everyday life to plan something out. So that is a completely fair criticism of how Sorcerer can kind of blend together if you don't have the right group, the right scenario, the right campaign.
Exactly. The trade-off, though, Sorceress Origin really does give you a lot of options to shore up a lot of potential weaknesses that you might otherwise have with a traditional caster. Like, what you lose in efficacy, you pick up in compensation for weaker areas, and that's not nothing either.
Yeah, and once you get used to the class, once you get used to spellcasting, if you're kind of seeing Sorcerer as your introduction, meta magic just becomes awesome and broken. Instead of one fireball, I'll have two, and I will dictate who it hits and who it doesn't. You can do some really, really cool stuff with sorcery points once you get how they work. And that does add a little bit of extra flavor. And then there's also the fact that one of my favorite times from a campaign, that goblin who was so happy because he stole the wizard's book, and the sorcerer saying, "That's not mine." And fireball. It was pretty great. So anything else on the wizard from your end?
Not really. I mean, I feel like we've covered most of that pretty well. The one thing that we didn't really touch on that I'm going to add just as a footnote for the wizard, and it's not nothing, particularly since it normally costs a feat, and that's the access to ritual casting.
Yeah, that is a big deal, especially for longer campaigns.
Pretty much what it says on the tin, you get the ritual casting feat for free, helps you to do your planning a lot better, really lets you take advantage of the spell book.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, it makes those short breaks a lot more viable, a lot more helpful for the wizard. It's not just the warlock profiting from them anymore. And honestly, if you're kind of looking to break into a casting class, you can't go wrong either way. There are a lot of extremely fun ways to play wizard and end up with a super strong character. There's a lot of super fun ways to play sorcerer and end up with a strong character. So, what are your best stories? Were you a wizard? Were you a sorcerer? Did you go with one of the other casting classes like warlock or bard? Let us know in the comments. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It is an easy and free way to support us. And until we get Braden's dorm room rebuilt, until next time, good gaming.
See you next time.
If you like what you just saw, please support us by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more great gaming content.